YouTube? What's going on? What's happening? As always, I am Hadou Kid, and today I kind of just wanted to talk to you guys, specifically about something I saw online for Gear 6. So a random article popped up when I was looking through Google News that said that there was a rumor that Gear 6 might be completely open world in campaign mode. Now, open world games definitely offer potential for vast, unique experiences for anybody that plays them, and you typically see them in RPGs. But shooters are also no stranger to success in the open world style of gaming these days. Now, Gears has traditionally been a more linear experience of gaming as far as narrow hallways, guided campaign levels, things of that nature. However, Gears 5 really established the first open world experience in the campaign and being introduced into the franchise. And I know there were mixed reviews on whether or not people like that or not, but the question for Gears 6 is a fully open world campaign good for the next game in the franchise, or is it a step in the wrong direction for a franchise that really needs to recapture its new and existing player base more now than ever? Now, just to preface this, these are all my opinions. Whether you like the open world aspect of Gears 5's campaign, or you hated it, or you're somewhere in the middle, this is just all my take on it. And again, these are all rumors, so they're not really confirmed yet, and we won't see it until we really hear more about Gears 6. First, I wanted to talk about the pros. Like I mentioned, there's various pros that come along with an open world experience. First of all, the most obvious is that as a player, you get more freedom. The world is literally open to doing whatever, typically in whichever order you'd like to do it in. Again, Gears has been more of a linear experience traditionally, so really there's small corridors and you can only go in a straight line forward and backwards, and again they're more guiding you through the story versus you being able to go explore a little more. So a lot of people like that more. They like the ability to go wherever they want, to go at their own pace and not feel so confined to a very linear story. Another pro is that having more of an open world gives you more opportunities for world building. With so much space, you can essentially build on many different kinds of environments and stories. You can have all kinds of different side quests. One example is when I think of Vasgar, when you played in that level in Gears 5 and you were on the, whatever it's called, the little sand sailboat. I forget what it's called right now, but being able to go to the different areas and talk to some of the remaining people there and learn more about the UIR and the different rocket areas and just going through the sand and stuff. It really told a story about that area and that point of time in the campaign. So being able to do that is a really cool experience, as well as planting various collectibles throughout the world. And in addition to having all these extra things, there's really just more playtime. I feel like when you have an open world game, you spend so much time exploring and just taking in everything around you that you end up playing the game for longer, at least in one playthrough. And for a company, of course, that benefits them because you're still playing the game more than you would a traditional linear story maybe. And for the player, again, you just kind of get so immersed in the experience that you don't want to leave out. So that benefits both sides. And then another pro is for anybody who is a fan of the skill tree system, that you see in RPGs where you can level up people's abilities. It allows for a cool upgradable experience. Everybody likes starting off as essentially a blank canvas and then being able to have broken abilities later in the game that make it easier or make it more fun just plowing through enemies. If that's what you're into, then again, Gears 5 kind of introduced that, and if they were to expand on that more, whether it be through Jack or through personal abilities, kind of like how they started off with Horde, that's gonna grab a lot of audience members who are fans of the RPG style of gaming. Now those are just the main pros that come to mind that I at least remember from Gears 5. But of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the cons. So the first con that comes to mind is the downside of having an open world experience in campaign, and that really is that there's too much freedom. Some people don't like having the ability to go anywhere and do anything at once because they lose focus. They don't necessarily know what their objective is. They get confused about what they need to do versus what they want to do versus what they should do first. There's just too much freedom, too many options, and some people really don't like that. They like being driven through the story almost like a movie or like a narrative, experience where again you're following the exact path that the creators wanted you to follow and you're just fully going down the timeline that was intended. Especially if you're used to the old style of Gears and you really like that play style, then the linear style is probably more tied to the nostalgia you have for the franchise. Another potential issue I see is that it's harder, I think, to create those dark, scarier moments that, again, we know from the original Gears games. So when you think about horror games, which Gears isn't a horror game, but again, it creates that dark, gritty environment. You think about the confined spaces and the ability to, again, walk players down an intended path that you can essentially manipulate the objects around it to help create that environment and help drive some of that grittiness and that fear or just excitement in players. And when you have an open world, again, it's all out in the open. Not only do you have not very confined areas and spaces, but you have to kind of introduce a certain level of brightness and visibility to the world because otherwise you can't see where you're going. If you're in a dark room, at least you have slight nods to where you're supposed to go versus in an open world, you have to visually, it has to be helpful to the player. So you almost eliminate the ability to make that dark, gritty environment. Another con is that with more space, there potentially may be less substance. And what I mean by that is, sure, having an open world is great and all, but what a lot of games tend to fail at is they don't usually fill those worlds with substance. Not many missions, not anything worth doing at least. There's just long valleys or deserts or just areas that just take a long time to get through. Again, the missions might just be like filler missions. I don't want to go help somebody, go help turn on all the power to this village. Like it is what it is. But I think a lot of times games give you the ability to go wherever you want, but don't give you enough stuff to do in an open world to keep you engaged. And some might argue that that may discourage replayability. If it took me forever just to get through this part of the game, I may not want to do that again. And again, games that are good at this, especially RPGs, they keep you coming back. And if Gears, I think, does that right, I think then maybe this isn't a con, but it's something to keep in mind. So getting back to the skill tree system, another potential con is that system may not be for everybody. Some people may just want a pure Gears experience where everybody has, like multiplayer, everybody has the same weapons, nobody has disadvantage or weird powers or whatever, and you're not locked into a certain character's strengths and or weaknesses. Gears has never been sort of an RPG style of game. Nowadays you see, like Halo, for example, they had their open world experience, which had the upgradable abilities and stuff. And again, it's hard to gauge whether it was a bad or good idea because it's really just up to the player whether you enjoyed that or not versus the previous experience. Again, that style is not for everybody, especially if you're starting off the game with essentially zero abilities. Obviously, the payoff is better later in the game when you level up, but some people just don't want that disadvantage early on, or they don't want to put in the time to get all the credits and whatever needed to upgrade, especially in an open world and you have to go searching for these things. Again, they kind of just ties in together. This next con is still a potential con, but I think it's a big one because when you have an open world, there's obviously more components and more opportunity for just glitches and the game crashing. Now, when I was in the campaign in Gears 5, I don't personally remember having a lot of issues, but I know a lot of people had issues with achievements not getting them and just like obviously just performance issues. And especially now that you have PC gaming along with console gaming, everybody can have a different system configuration. So trying to have a general level of quality and how the game performs is more difficult now than ever. So the more you have to account for in this open world experience that you're trying to make beautiful and make functional, the more you have to really play test. And again, with the speed at which games are coming out and the almost expectation that they're not going to be ready when they launch, it just seems like it's introducing more opportunity for failure. As somebody who just recently got done playing the latest Zelda game, Tears of the Kingdom, and who's played other open world games, I can tell you that a polished open world game will stand out far above the ones that are just broken. And the ones that are broken will be remembered, but always for the wrong reasons. And finally, again, the biggest con is that the open world system isn't what Gears has been. It's not where Gears has succeeded in. And that's probably more of a closed-minded take depending on how you look at it. But if I take anything away from Gears 5, it's that Gears has slowly been transitioning away from what Gears of War used to be. Hence why they took the of War out of the name. It's supposed to be a different experience. However, following different trends and stuff that games like, you know, the Destinies of the world or whoever you might want to reference in order to better fit the modern playstyle hasn't seemed to really capture an audience long term like they probably expected it to do for Gears. This is more of a biased take perhaps, but I feel like a lot of Gears fans, from the comments I've seen and just the forum posts and all the things I've seen in videos, a lot of Gears fans want what Gears used to be. Obviously in an updated setting, story, and format, but again, the dark, gritty vibes and, you know, to some degree, somewhat of a linear story from the perspective is that it's not all over the place. And again, character building that you can do in an open world, but specifically just characters that you put in tough situations that get through them together and seem cohesive as a team. And, you know, just when you go through what Gears used to be, Gears 5 definitely was a step away from that. And to go to an open world experience with the potential cons, again, it's just very risky. And when you think about capturing the play base, again, especially the people who were playing Gears since they were younger, there, I think, should be some level of just not fan service necessarily, but just, again, making sure you recapture the hearts of the people who fell in love with like Gears 1, 2, and 3. So those are the pros and the cons that I can think of. Let me know if you guys think of any others that come to mind when you look at, should Gears be open world or should it be more linear? You know, open world is lately especially more trendy in how games go. You know, it's just kind of like the meta these days. And in Gears 5, it was an interesting change of pace, but here's my opinion, just for what it's worth. I think Gears right now should excel at what it's good at and what it essentially built its legacy on. It should create more moments where there are confined spaces and gritty, scary moments for the player to experience throughout the story, as well as building on the characters in these environments where they have to come together and power through, you know, with their different individual stories and characteristics. Now, if you can't tell, I am a little more biased towards it not being open world, but I'm always open-minded to anything, if done right, to just enhance the gaming experience. So what I want to do to end this is just to list off a couple of keys to success that I think, if they were going to go with the open world concept, would be necessary in order to really make it a home run. First off, when you're exploring a particular space on foot, whether it's a main mission or a side mission or like an Easter egg area where it's like a small hut or a building or a village, I think those are opportunities where you can, again, condense the space that the character's in, allow them to feel more confined, dim the lights a lot. There are like a few moments in Gears 5 where I can think it was dark, and especially when they introduced like the DBs with the leeches and stuff on them. You know, that was kind of like in that horror movie realm, and like, so they kind of dabbled in it. Like, that's where you can do more of it. Again, if you're going to have the open world, you're still going to have that open space, and you're going to kind of take away from just being able to follow the story in one linear path. But at least if you're gonna do it, make sure you add in those moments to where like the open world aspect is like a palate cleanser or like a breath of fresh air from this scary ass dungeon of a building you just went through where locusts were, wretches crawling through the buildings, like little stuff like that I think will really bring us back to those days where Gears 1 first came out and you were like, I'm not messing with this place. Another thing, like I mentioned before, is just filling the open world with plenty of world building and character building missions and collectibles. I think there's nothing worse than an open world with nothing in it. And an open world campaign that's primarily empty or filled with just filler missions, I think is much worse than a linear campaign that masterfully manages the empty space and tells a story with the content it does put in it. So just making sure that if you're gonna give us the ability to go anywhere and do anything, that there's plenty to do and that everything has substance. Another thing for the whole skill-based RPG style system is that if that continues, which it probably will because that is what was in Halo and that's again kind of just what the mainstream is now, at least make the abilities meaningful and cool. As a player, there's little to no incentive to go around collecting items that help upgrade the character if the abilities don't really enhance the character. And that's not to say that those abilities weren't, somewhat useful in Gears 5, but I think you could expand on a lot more, like in Horde, for example, how Coltrane was the original one who only had the ability to charge through enemies burning in fire. Like, again, make it so that you're like a dog in the game. You know what I'm saying? Like if you playing, I don't know if you play as Cole, but just like give people traits that make it so that, yeah, I believe this person could take on a horde of locusts. Like give them something to that degree where you want to upgrade it. When I think back on when Halo Infinite released and all the feedback that I saw on the campaign, as well as my own experience with the campaign, is that grapple hook, man, did a lot of heavy lifting. Even in all the reviews I saw for the game, people were like, there's some areas to improve on in campaign, but man, the grapple hook is fun as heck. And I think that's something that made the game better even when it was struggling. It's a small thing, but it made it so that whether you were in the main story or you were outside of it just engaged in combat, you were having a good time and you were engaged and it didn't feel like you were just doing arbitrary missions. Another idea is having the ability to switch characters just in the middle of a thing. If you're gonna lock in specific upgrades to a specific character, kind of like again Horde style mode, like if Del, given he's around in the story, can only use DBs or something like that, again, give him some good abilities and then lock them into him. So that if you're in a DB stage and you're playing as like Kate and Dell and Marcus or something, you have the ability to switch to Marcus unless you're playing co-op or something. I think that's cool. I think it gives you a different experience. And, I don't know how hard it is to implement something like that, but like, it just seems like it enhances the meaning towards having abilities in campaign. And finally, again, I just can't reiterate this enough. The game has to be polished. If people are going to put the extra time into playing the game, and clearly the developers are putting a lot of time into making the game, and we all recognize that and we all appreciate that. Whenever it drops, we just all want it to be playable. I don't think any of us want it to drop and then essentially it's like 30% of what the game should be and it doesn't work. And there's so many launches, especially on Game Pass, that they drop and they just don't work, and then you really lose that initial hype release. And again, if I go back to games, I'm just using Zelda because that's the latest game I played. I put so much time into that game. In between that or the Elder Scrolls games, which is not a shooter, I know, but whatever open world game you want to look at, think of the best ones you've played and think of how polished they were. Elder Scrolls might not have been a good example because they'll be kind of buggy, but it was like funny buggy. I don't know. But again, a polished open world game will always stand out for the best reasons, and an unpolished buggy one will always be remembered for the worst. And just given the drop in player base for Gears 5 and some of just the dings that it's taken from the veteran community and the new community, I think it's more pivotal than ever to knock it out the park off rip. So if you're gonna go open world, just make sure you test it. Make sure you get people involved to give feedback. You know, you don't want to lose the player base from glitches and bugs before you even get a chance for it to grow again. And you can probably hear the passion in my voice because, again, like, it's not just Gears. There's so many games we play these days that drop and they're just almost unplayable. And as somebody who used to go to the midnight releases at the EB Games and the GameStops of the world and played the game day one and just like had a blast because it was more or less the full game and it was pretty functional, like, to go from that to what we have now is just really heartbreaking, man. It really just, gaming is in a weird state in my opinion from that perspective. So again, guys, this is all just a rumor right now, but I thought it was an interesting enough rumor to talk about as far as if Gears did this, how could they succeed? What are the pros and the cons? And yeah, essentially, I'm curious what you guys think. Do you want another open world campaign, especially if that's really the bulk of the campaign? Do you want it just like Gears 1, 2, and 3 where it's linear and again you find the collectibles when you get them? You know, again, you know my take. I'm really leaning just towards Gears 6 being like a Gears, like almost like the Smash Ultimate of Gears. Not Gears Ultimate, there's obviously Gears Ultimate. You know what I mean? Just the best Gears game to ever drop because it learned from all of the past mistakes and successes. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you like this, please leave a like. Subscribe if you haven't. Share with your friends. Again, I want to hear what you guys think. I want to hear what the community thinks. We got plenty of time, it seems, until the next Gears game drops. So I just want to know what you guys are doing. Are you playing Gears right now? Are you playing the old games? I know some people don't even play Gears 5 no more. They just play Gears 2 because that was their jam, and rightfully so. But yeah, I appreciate the love and support, guys, as always, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.